Looking to the future, a master of musical synthesis, a lifetime spent seeking to penetrate the ultimate mystery of all music. Who is our mystery composer? I'll tell you in just a second. Greetings, music lovers. Rick Ferguson, rickfergusonmusic.com. Thank you for viewing this video. Please like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. Mystery composer, Ferruccio Busoni. Ferruccio Dante Michelangelo Benvenuto Busoni. Born in Empoli, Italy in 1866, died in Berlin, Germany in 1924. Busoni is one of the more complicated, compelling, fascinating life stories that I've run across in recent years, and I have deeply enjoyed delving in to Busoni's lifetime and all of the richness of his many musical activities. He toured as one of the truly preeminent concert pianists through Europe and U.S. for decades. He taught in short stints at music conservatories in Helsinki, Finland, in Boston, USA, at the still nascent Conservatory of Music. He also taught in Moscow for a year. He wrote extensively on music, both as a music critic, but also with his treatise, which is more a musical philosophical treatise that was published in 1907. And we'll talk a little bit about that. He was always interested in, as he described, looking ahead to music of the future, to musical currents of the day. As an example, he was very interested in microtonal music. Busoni even went as far as creating his own keyboard instrument, his own harmonium, with steps, whole steps in thirds, instead of the traditional half-step note patterns that we're so accustomed to. He was very interested in 12-tone music, in serialism. Schoenberg and Anton Weber and Alban Berg in Austria and Germany after the turn of the century, and did some of his own experimentation with that. By the time Busoni was 15, he had already created 150 compositions of his own. He saw himself throughout his lifetime primarily as a composer, although the rest of the world really viewed him primarily as a virtuoso and incredibly compelling and powerful pianist. Busoni's father, Ferdinando, was a traveling virtuoso clarinetist whose musical training was really spotty, but had developed a repertoire based mostly on variations and other works on popular operatic songs, arias of the day, and was a rather imposing figure in young Busoni's life, reminding me somewhat of the relationship between Amadeus Mozart and his father Leopold, and Ludwig Beethoven and his father as well, sort of trying to leverage the precocious talents of their children for their own purposes. Busoni's mother, Anna Weiss, was a well-trained pianist, and most likely, musically and emotionally, was Busoni's rock when he grew up, and really set the stage in terms of Busoni's own love of the piano and love of the literature for it as well. Busoni was a very well-read youngster, and apparently was utterly taken with the novel written in the early 17th century by Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote. And for whatever reason, Busoni really identified with the Don Quixote character, more or less the solitary figure out in the world on continuous quests. And in a way, from what I have learned, that really Busoni's life in so many ways. In this video, I want to focus on Busoni's publication of a 5-part series of piano tutorials written towards the end of Busoni's life, 1917 to 1924. In these 5 volumes, Busoni is not only creating a wonderful, a fascinating system for creating a solid technical and musical foundation pianistically, but it's a glimpse into Busoni's interest in synthesizing the pianistic styles and approaches, specifically Franz Liszt, of Anton Rubinstein in Russia, and then also Johannes Brahms. So pianistically, and to a great extent, late Beethoven too. That's more compositional. But these are the pianists and composers that really formed Busoni's approach toward piano playing and building a technical foundation. So we'll hear a few excerpts from those in a moment. The first two volumes are a series of preludes and etudes and exercises. The third volume is dedicated specifically to staccato studies. Those three volumes Busoni dedicated to the Basel, Switzerland Conservatory, where he spent a little time teaching. The fourth volume is Busoni's own reworking of 8 etudes by pianist Johann Baptist Kremer, and he dedicated those etudes to Professor Karl Lütschik in St. Petersburg, Russia. And then the fifth and final volume, Variations in Perpetual Motion, pieces in various keys. A really interesting collection of pieces that Busoni wrote himself and dedicated to his own student and protege, Tagliapietra. And this was Busoni's protege, who was an incredible pianist, but also a teacher in Italy for a number of decades, and carried on a lot of Busoni's own thoughts in terms of piano teaching specifically. Busoni did his first formal training at the age of 13 in Graz, Austria, with Dr. Wilhelm Meyer. This was a 2-year course of study that the young Busoni finished in 15 months. And in this 2-year course of study, there was harmony and counterpoint using the music of Cherubini as a model. Fugue, well, of course, the fugues of Johann Sebastian Bach as the main model. Orchestration, relying on the works of Berlioz, Brahms, and Charles Gounod. Lots of different musical forms, musical history, especially studying medieval and Renaissance music as source material. And so this was a very wide-ranging course of study that Busoni undertook. Let's see the program of his final graduation concert. And remember, he was 15 years old when he presented this program in March of 1881. Robert Schumann's Complete Piano Concerto, Beethoven's Opus 111 Sonata, and the Opus 111 was a sonata that was to gain special significance for Busoni, and Busoni programmed it throughout the coming decades of his performing lifetime. Busoni's own string quartet in C minor, his Opus 56, his Opus 57 Prelude and Fugue, and also a setting of Psalm 67 for chorus and orchestra. A 15-year-old doing that. Let's go forward a little bit to Vienna, Austria, in November of 1883, and Busoni's debut recital in Vienna featured Bach's Italian Concerto, Beethoven Opus 111 again, the symphonic etudes of Robert Schumann, the Andante Spinato and Grand Polonaise of Frédéric Chopin, Liszt, Mendelssohn Midsummer Night's Dream for the piano, and Busoni's own Variations in Scherzo for piano trio and 2 of his own etudes. Busoni was known for putting together mammoth-sized programs that really just are astounding to me. After his debut recital in Vienna, he was hired by the independent newspaper from Trieste, Italy, to write a series of articles, continuing articles, and musical criticism about musical life in Vienna during the day. Here is an excerpt from 1883 when Busoni was fairly new to Vienna. There is music everywhere and too much of it. The wars of the Wagnerians and anti-Wagnerians are not over yet. Brahms too has his party, and the Slavs and Germans are continually fighting. So the world goes on like cats and dogs, eternal unrest, without which the world would not exist. Then, quite a few years later in 1907, when Busoni really had a clearer sense of musical life, not only in Vienna but throughout Europe. By that time he had settled for the most part in Berlin, but was constantly on tour. I begin to realize that the ruin of the Viennese as regards their attitude to art comes from newspaper criticism. This systematic daily reading for half a century of causeries on art, witty and superficial, short, and all turning on an obvious catchword, has destroyed for the Viennese their own power of seeing and hearing, comparing and thinking with any seriousness. These little Viennese have something Parisian in their thirst for enjoyment and their own superiority, and in their chase after sensations, they are often badly taken in, like the Parisians. That's 1907. So obviously not very shy with his opinions, but over the years, as he was becoming a more mature musical artist, composer, he was also a very deep philosophical musical thinker. And apparently the treatise from 1891, written by Austrian music critic Edward Hanslick, had a significant impact on Busoni's own thinkings about music and art. And there was one quote from this that Busoni kept with him on his person for many, many years. Here's the quote by Hanslick: "Beautiful music is the art of the prophets that can calm the agitations of the soul. It is one of the most magnificent and delightful presents God has given us. Music is the shorthand of emotion. When words leave off, music begins. Music can change the world because it can change people." And apparently Busoni really resonated with that and took that very seriously, took that to heart, and incorporated that worldview about the purpose of music into everything that he did in terms of his writing, his compositions, his teaching, his interactions with others, his place in the world in general. His deep study of Franz Liszt's compositional style as well as technical approach toward piano playing, and Liszt's at that time rather revolutionary uses of the piano in terms of just creating symphonic effects, creating washes of sounds, pre-impressionistic uses of the piano, really fascinated Busoni, and Busoni was constantly trying to reconcile the inherent tension philosophically, culturally, pianistically, musically, between his own Italianate sensibilities and upbringing, but then this huge influence of Liszt and then also Brahms and other Germanic composers. Let's listen to a few of these short excerpts from the first volume, Preludes and Etudes, published in 1917. As I mentioned, I think this gives a really fascinating glimpse into piano technique of the day and how Busoni, of course, viewed the building and expression of piano technique. So the first two instances here will be drawn first from the Totentanz of Franz Liszt, scale passage work, and then an adjoining short etude by Busoni using scalular, stepwise, and also arpeggiated chords. Enjoy. Our third example will be the use of sliding fingers to create interesting sound waves on the piano, and this is something that Busoni based on Brahms' 51 exercises, Brahms' own manual of studies, and there are a number of exercises where Brahms is employing sliding the fingers across the keys melodically for finger strength and independence. So let's hear that example. Examples 4 and 5 are drawn first from piano accompaniment for one of the Lieder of Franz Schubert, and then Busoni's own Indian diary, and an excerpt that was also incorporated into Busoni's own piano concerto. Enjoy! Our sixth example is taken from a tarantella-like composition that's based loosely on an arrangement of a Liszt tarantella by the pianist Aubert. And this is Busoni using that to work on detached notes, quick note motion, and then more expansive rolled chords. And then finally, in our seventh excerpt, we have music drawn specifically from the Waldstein Sonata of Ludwig Beethoven. And so this is a great arpeggiation study and a lot of fun. And those of you who know the Waldstein, you'll recognize this immediately. So enjoy. That whets your curiosity and appetite for maybe some alternative types of technical work that you might have at your disposal. Busoni, not only as a composer, as a pianist, as a philosopher, as a writer about music, he also was an editor. He edited all of J.S. Bach's works for the keyboard. He edited as well all of Franz Liszt's keyboard output. That is an incredible amount of music and a great legacy. Specific to Liszt, there was a time where Busoni also assumed the mantle that Liszt had put in to motion in Weimar, Germany, teaching month-long series of piano masterclasses. Well, Busoni took that on and continued that tradition in the summers of 1900 and 1901, and then later in Basel, Switzerland in 1910 and Vienna, Austria in 1908. So this teaching legacy was very important for Busoni, and this quote from 1906 gives us a little bit of a look into why that might be. Both as man and as artist, I prefer to look forwards rather than backwards, and I suppose that is why I prefer to have younger people around me. And so he was constantly surrounding himself with the younger generation, helping him, in his view, to really look forward to what he termed to be the music of the future. So thank you for joining me. I want to leave you with a quote from a book, really the foundational book into Busoni scholarship, by E.J. Dent. And I think this sums up Busoni's life really well. Here's the quote. Busoni knew himself inwardly to be a composer and perhaps something more. It is not too much to say that he knew himself to be a philosopher and a prophet. It was not merely personal vanity or ambition that dominated his thoughts. Any weakness of that kind he had shaken off years ago. What made it impossible for the world to understand him was that he felt himself to be a man with a mission. The ordinary artistic world can understand easily enough a man whose motives are purely commercial. It can even extend certain tolerance to mere vanity. But a man who regards his art as if it were a religion, which he has been called by heaven both to preach and to practice, regardless of worldly conventions and understandings, finds himself in an impossible position. He is like a stranger speaking a language which no one understands and offering riches in a currency which the local money market does not acknowledge. And there we have that solitary Don Quixote figure going out and tilting at artistic windmills throughout his life. Fascinating person. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing and for sharing your thoughts about Busoni and any other thing musically, artistically, that you find to be of interest. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.